Colleagues, welcome everybody. We're just going to give another 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to dive in. Welcome. Nice to see you, Elizabeth. So colleagues, we'll use the chat function to keep this as interactive as we can. We have a lot that we want to cover in 30 minutes. So please do keep an eye on a couple of questions and prompts that my colleagues will provide in the chat. We are delighted to join you and have this conversation today on understanding COVID impact on the SDGs using futures modeling. And I'm going to say a little bit about the overall study. I should say that I am Laurel Patterson. I'm our lead for SDG integration at UNDP. And I'm joined by my colleague Babatunde Abadoye, and he is our global advisor. He's leading on this study together with Party Center. And he manages a data futures platform for UNDP. This is a new and really exciting space that we launched just last year. And we're actually going to move over, after we go through a couple of slides to give you the background, we're going to move right into the data futures space. We want to walk you through how you can interact with this data, how you can download this data, how you can use this information to open a dialogue and influence policy choices and decisions in whatever country you are joining us from today. So, why, if we go to the next slide, please. Why did we use scenarios to try to understand COVID impact on the SDGs? And what I wanted to say, at the outset is that modeling scenarios was really an opportunity for us to think about the long-term futures to 2030, but also to 2050, and to build scenarios that help us understand not only the way that COVID could impact development trajectories, but also what would the effects be of different policy interventions. And so what we've done is put together these three scenarios, and we'll walk you through the data, as I said, next. One is really a baseline scenario. So this represents significant impact on poverty and on hunger as a result of COVID, but at a level that's pretty much in line with World Bank poverty-related projections as those look right now. The second is a high damage scenario, and this describes a future which is significantly impacted, where COVID recovery is fragmented. It is more difficult in some countries than others. Supply chains are disrupted significantly more than we might imagine they would be right now. This is our high damage scenario, where recovery really is delayed. And then we put together this third scenario, and this is what we're going to spend some time talking about today, with 48 different parameters that model the potential impact that certain policy choices could have on human development trajectories. And in our first study, we take a look especially at what that would mean for poverty levels. Next slide, please. So our research shows in the SDG push scenario, that last scenario where we modeled a set of ambitious yet feasible policy interventions, we see that in fact, we could exceed the development trajectory globally that the world was on even before COVID impact. And this is reflecting the reality we all know, is that even before COVID, we were not on track to meet the targets and goals of the SDGs or the ambition of the 2030 agenda, which underpins it. Next slide, please. So what are these 48 parameters? And I would really encourage you here, it's awfully hard to see on the slide, but it is really important for you to understand the parameters, the assumptions, and the data that's underpinning them. We modeled 48 parameters, which are reflected here, that cover broadly areas related to investments in governance, in social protection, in green economy, and in digitalization. Next slide, please. And what did that tell us? So that told us that globally, by 2030, we could reduce the number of people living in poverty, living in extreme poverty, by 146 million. And we would narrow the gender gap in that process. We would be able to boost human development, especially for countries that are affected by crisis, because the majority of those 146 million people are in countries which are at higher risk of being left behind. And we'll give you a little preview of a publication which we'll be launching next week, which is looking specifically at countries that are at the lower end of the human development spectrum. And we're asking ourselves a few more questions, and kicking the tires would be another way of saying this on the SDG push scenario. What is it that could be most effective in supporting countries, not only to recover from COVID, but to initiate pathways that are more equitable and more sustainable coming out of COVID? And there are significant gains in this scenario as well, too, in terms of escaping malnutrition, and also the number of children that would graduate from secondary school. It rises from 66% to 70% overall in the SDG push scenario. Next slide, please. We're going to take you through what this looks like on the Data Futures platform. What was really important for us with this study and for the scenarios themselves is that you are able to interact with this data and use this data, understand what it looks like. All of these data are based on, all of the scenarios are based on national data. So you'll be able to pull this specifically for different countries and ask a set of perhaps deeper questions. This is sort of an introduction into the way that COVID could impact development trajectories in a particular country. So what would that look like in a particular setting? And I'm going to hand over to Babatunde to walk us through those details. Babatunde, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, evening, colleagues. So give me 1 second, trying to switch my screen here. All right. Thanks for joining us today. My job is relatively easy. One of the things we wanted to walk you through today is, and as Laura mentioned, we've done the publication working with the Paddy Center, and we have different sets of results, global analysis that we did, and then results for at the country level, right? And we want today to be able to show you how you can go into the Data Futures platform and be able to download the results, look at the different ways you can interact with the analysis that we have and the results, and then be able to use that for discussions with whether at the national level or with in the different thematic areas. For those of you that might not be familiar with Data Futures platform, it's data.undp.org, and it's a platform that was launched in December last year. That is we're using in UNDP to be able to present, bring data together from different places, and also be able to present insights, right? So the goal of the platform is to be able to generate different sets of insights like this that we're sharing today, and other insights that you can look at, including like the gender tracker, the discussions around NDCs, and some other analysis that are on there. So here, I'm going to put the link in the chat, or if Nadine can let me put it, that would be great. So what we have is once you get to the page, we have, you start with this display that we had in the presentation, and also some link to the study itself. Right? So description of the different scenarios, the baseline scenario, the high damage, and the SDG push. And then from there, if you saw earlier when Laura presented on the slides, it wasn't that easy to see what the different 48 parameters look like. But here you can kind of go through the wheel and see under the disruption, for instance, what parameters were included in the model and were changed. So under governance, for instance, we have improves governance participation and efficiency by 30%, right? And then you have for under green economy, social protection, digital disruption, looking at broadband access, internet access, and the rest. So here you can be able to look at all the parameters and be able to understand it. And then after that, we have, we talked about how the benefits are echoed across the additional human development indicators. in the publication, we talked a lot more about poverty, right? But here, you can be able to look at many other parameters, many other SDGs. Right? Female poverty, minority children percent, minority population, maternal mortality, missing primary students, right? Neonatal mortality, population living on less than $1.90 as a percent, and also as a total number. And then we have the poverty sex difference, and then under 5 mortality. So all these are here for that you can be able to interact with and change. So if I can change this to population living on less than $1.90, for instance, or minority population percent. And this will change, the plot will change with, here I'm highlighting the no COVID scenario, which is the world without COVID. But we know now that we've moved a lot out of that, but just gives us the trajectory of the country before, right? And then you can select or uncheck there. So if I only want to see the SDG push scenario, I can uncheck the no COVID. I can uncheck the other scenarios also. And then in addition to this, we also have the option to be able to explore the results by region. Right? So here we have Central and Southern Asia countries, Europe and North America. Then we also have extreme fragile and conflict-affected countries, and we can, explore the results based on that. So here it's presenting the percent by itself, and then on the side it's presenting the difference. Right? So in many cases, you want to know the difference between one of the scenarios to the no COVID scenario, right? So how much impact has COVID had in the for OECD fragile and conflict-affected countries? So what it's presenting here, so the green or the red, the dark red is high damage, and that's a difference in gap. So how much of a drop have we seen because of COVID, and how much we will gain because of the SDG push scenario? So the other thing here is being able to download the image, right? So here we can, if you drill down to a particular country that you wanted to look at, or a region like this, you can share it online. You can download the image, you can export the data that you've selected. So this makes it a lot easier to not be able to write a report. You can just download the image and put it in your policy brief or the write-up that you might be doing. So another view, another set of results here, it's another way of presenting it is looking at the global map, right? So what might the world look like in the next decades, exploring how regions and countries are predicted. And here, what we're trying to see is, what we're trying to see is a map of the impacts across countries, right? I can see by region and what the impact is on Africa and the rest. And here, in addition, you can also see either 2030 or 2050 and be able to change that. So here, I can do percent, and then I can either do the COVID baseline or the high damage scenario, and also be able to see. And once you're over the region, you can be able to interact with it. The same for here, you can download the image and you can share online. This other one here, down here, presents the results for, depending on regions, right? So here we have, for instance, if I want to see, compare different regions easily, right? I want to see the impact of COVID by Europe and North America, right, and the rest. And I can also add more to here. All right, so here, right now I have the regions, but I can also add the OECD fragile countries. I can compare them to a particular country. So if I wanted to add Algeria or Malawi or some other countries here, then it updates automatically and presents the results that way. So this is another way of easily comparing the results. Here I can be able to see. And the same for the others, I can select other SDG indicators and see how that is presented there. So, and then you can export that data, you can share it online on Twitter and the rest, and then you can download the image. And this I can change from 2030 to 2050, right, depending on what future that you're trying to look at. So from there, here we also have, so one of the things that is interesting as you start to dig into the result is being able to compare, if you want to be able to compare countries based on 2 dimensions, right? So which countries have going to be highly impacted by COVID, and in terms of poverty and in terms of nutrition, for instance. So this gives the opportunity to be able to do those kind of correlation in this instance, right? So we have, you can also select multiple countries, right? And here you can change the indicator. So here currently I have poverty, population poverty. I can change that, and then you start to see, Somalia is here with a high predicted for high damage COVID baseline to have a higher malnourished population, and at the same time, there's a high population living in poverty. But then you have some countries like Mozambique that has a high population living in poverty, but the malnourished population percentage predicted is lower. So this kind of analysis makes it easier in order to be able to investigate the result better. And here you can switch, you can add SDG push scenario to it. I can look at only the SDG push scenario. I can see which countries are gaining. Right? I can also look at it up to 2050 and see how the map, the chart changes in 2050. Right? So in 2030, we have Somalia here. It's now down here in terms of population living on less than $1.90, and now it's switched to Central Africa, or Burundi. So that's the kind of analysis that is possible to do here. And the same with the other, you can download the image and also be able to interact. So we wanted to run this by you so that you can be able to see that there are different ways to interact with the results and be able to get out the analysis that you want. And I'll be happy to hand it over to Laura.
Babatunde, thanks. We are running short on time, so I want to give an opportunity for questions. There's a couple that have come up in the chat already. Maybe we can just take your screen down for now, Babatunde, so that we can see everybody again. Hi, everyone. Let me say this, since we are running late and I want to ensure that we can interact with you on this, I'm asking Babatunde to also include our email address in the chat. The most important thing for us, the most important thing for this study is that it can be used to help drive decision-making in countries. And the publication that comes out next week, but you can work from the data that's on Data Futures already, will be targeted at countries at the lower end of the human development spectrum, those that are facing multidimensional risks and challenges, and those that we would understand as fragile. And what we want to be able to do with this study is answer that question, or contribute to answering the question, how? How do we recover better from COVID? We know we need to accelerate progress on the SDGs. How? And one way that we can start getting at those policy interventions that can really make a change, that have cascade impacts across wide areas of the SDGs, is by using these future scenarios, which are entirely data driven. So let me just leave it at that for a moment and open up in a democratic way and ask if there's anyone who would like to unmute themselves and come in. And for colleagues who ask questions in the chat that we don't have an opportunity to answer, we will ensure that those questions are answered and come back to you over the course of the next day or two. So would anyone like to unmute themselves and hop in? Okay, in that case, Babatunde, what I might ask a couple of questions in the chat with maybe you can reflect on is, what are the data sources? Where does this come from? And can you maybe say a word about what underpins the question that came about what underpins the COVID baseline scenario? So maybe those two questions: where does this data come from? How does the International Futures model work? Maybe just to say a word on that, and then just a little bit more detail. And colleagues, you can find more on data futures as well too, of what is underpinning each of the scenarios. Thank you, Babatunde.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, for the question on the data. Yes, we can send also to you the link to the information on the data to everyone later. The International Futures model, so as part of the data, a lot of it is based on the social accounting matrices and different years of research of putting some of this together. Some of the data are also coming from the World Bank, some of them like the governance, for instance, the peace index, and the rest. So we can share the full detail of the data set with you so that you can be able to have a look at it. In terms of the COVID baseline itself, the assumption is that, based on the estimate for that the IMF released in last year of the impact of COVID, right? It's based on that, right? So the GDP forecast that was already used, and then the additional assumptions on when we think that the recovery effort will start. So the assumption was that the recovery will be back in about 2 years, which relative to the high damage, we say the recovery is going to be slower, right, as we might expect, and that in the next, it doesn't get back to 100% in 2 years. It takes time for it to be able to get back. So that's the assumptions, the difference between the COVID baseline and the high damage scenario. On how to add natural resources and climate resilience to the indicators, the publication that next week we are going to update this with results on climate and results on water and sanitation, and also some on peace and security. And in the model itself, there are different parameters which has to do with environment and climate that were changed in order to for the SDG push scenario. But there's a lot that can still be explored, and we're happy to work with you, Nuri, if you're interested in more on that. Thanks.
Colleagues, would anyone else like to come in? Any other questions that you'd like to ask at this time?
So I see a question here from Nuri on any chance to add multiple risks, including COVID, climate-related disasters, and etc. Yes, I think that would be something interesting to do. But one of the things we've been discussing is to add for the next phase of this to do something like that, right? So look into environment, look into climate disasters, and try and model that in addition to this. So I know for some regions and for some countries, those multiple events, including COVID, has happened, and we need to be able to map factor all of them together on the COVID impact. So I think that would be interesting to look at. Thanks.
Babtuni, thank you. If there's no other, Babtuni, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say that if you can just also talk about the training and all the other things we're doing later in the year.
So one of the things, colleagues, yep, I think Babtuni, that would be a good segue to as a call to action for this group to further engage. So we'll be providing a training on international futures so that you can develop scenarios similar to what we've done here that are specific to your countries and specific to the regions and contexts in which you're working. So please stay tuned. We will be reaching out to all of you. You will find this space on Spark Blue as well too. So Nadine, maybe you're also able to provide that link for the group, but there will be an opportunity to build capabilities so that you can take these scenarios forward in your own settings. But in the meantime, we do want to ensure that the Data Futures platform is a space that's accessible to you. So please do reach out to us if there's specific questions you have or queries, analysis that you'd like to run using these scenarios, questions you want to ask in the countries you're working, please reach out to us and we'd be very happy to do that. Otherwise, please stay tuned for our next publication, which will come out next week. And as we've said, this will dig a little bit further into the SDG push scenario, interrogate further what would it take to recover from COVID and to drive sustainable and equitable pathways. We'll be looking at this to 2030 and to 2050. And we have quite interesting findings in terms of what's possible. So we look forward to engaging with all of you as that additional work comes out next week. And thank you, Nadine, who's also sharing some further information on where you can interact with our work in the SDG portfolio. And otherwise, thank you so much. I think there'll be a couple of links that go back in the chat box for all of you that can help you reconnect back to the main session.
Yeah, you can click on the YouTube link that Nadine highlighted to the chat in order to go back to the sessions.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.